getting
You get it.
relationship, friendship.
The
and that's
reward
blessing.
is that you can give more away, not that you get something, but that you can get the
Or
opportunity
just
to
that
give
you're
them.
seeing others fed.
Or
Yeah.
If you're not getting anything back.
I was thinking it was more that, like, it's easy to be generous with your family or friends, and this is a bit more instructional of being blessed with the poor is not necessarily,
It's how to be generous.
you know,
Yeah.
like when you're poor,
Yeah.
it's, you know, if you've got things to give, it's easy to give. I didn't explain
Well, maybe you need to
Mm.
skip down to the number 11 where it says, "He who loves a pure heart and whose speech is generous will make the king for his friends." That's kind of its. I don't know.
It's a hard one, that one, isn't it?
It is,
It's a
yeah.
really good one, though.
I think that one's lovely because to
It
me
is lovely.
that's one I chose too. I think the king represents to me a power. You know,
Mm.
the king
Yeah.
is a powerful person.
Yeah, yeah.
So that represents power, and if you love pure, you know, we think sometimes of power as people that are just squash other people, but it's
Yeah.
not. People who are pure of heart and are so gracious, they're so winsome.
Gracious.
I mean, look at Jesus; he was so completely winsome, and that makes a person very powerful when they're
Mm.
gracious of speech and when they're
Yeah.
pure of heart at the
Yeah.
same time.
Yeah.
So that I thought that was a beautiful verse.
Yeah.
It's lovely.
And people are more willing to listen.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's sort of been
Correct.
that proverb has been because there's a number of them like that throughout Proverbs, and it's been sort of a touchstone for me. When in business, you don't try to, you know, manipulate and suck up to people. You just do the right thing and be a person of integrity, and that will bring respect and honour. And that's been my experience. So yeah, it's I think
That's very true.
yeah.
It is true.
I actually liked verse 7. The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is the slave of the lender. I love the parallelism there, where they're unpacking why the rich rules over the poor. So you know, it's a step parallelism, because if you know the poor are often borrowers and they become enslaved,
Yeah.
and it's a real warning. It's a really and boy oh boy does our society need to pay attention to that proverb.
You get the same sort of warning in that verse 3. The prudent sees danger and hides himself, but the simple, which is the opposite of prudent,
Yeah,
go on and suffer for it.
I chose that one as well.
yeah.
I thought it
So that's contrast,
Which one was
right?
that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very, it's very
But then-
wise, and in the whole, you're always trying to tell the kids stop and think. You know,
Yeah.
there's a lot of value in that, but is that it's not always useful, because sometimes it's the courageous who see danger and take the risk and make a sacrifice. You know, regardless of the danger.
Mm.
So.
Yeah. If somebody's really simple, though, they won't learn from their suffering. That's the
No,
sad
that's
thing.
right. Yeah, it has that definite angle on
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
A good one for our day and age is the first one. A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, and favor better than silver and gold. And you think of all the people that have gotten rich quick and done things, and they think everybody's wonderful. Then all of a sudden, people start finding all the bad, rotten things they've done, and they lose their reputation.
Yeah, yeah.
overnight.
Yeah.
The other light was 14, but we won't talk about that one.
Well, you talk about riches and poors again. I'm just going through. You've got contrast here of 2. Rich and poor have this in common: the Lord is the maker of them all.
Mm.
So you got the rich. So that's easy to understand, that one. Then you flick over to number 16. Is that the one I want? Yeah. Who opposes the poor to increase his wealth? Oppressors. Got to get my words right. He who oppresses the poor to increase his wealth, and he who gives gifts to the rich, both come to poverty.
It now makes sense because you're saying oppressors rather than opposers.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Now
Oppressors.
it's all
Oppressors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even within this chapter, there's,
My
if
English.
you read the Proverbs on wealth and poverty, you can see a much richer perspective than if you just choose one of them, because some of them, where is it? There's one of the, I think it's in this chapter where it must be in the chapter before. It talks about, God will reward you with riches and wealth if you... the reward for humility and fear of the Lord is riches and honour and life, right? So it makes wealth sound like a simple good.
Yeah, but if you read it, all the wealth ones and all the poor ones together, you get a bigger picture, don't you?
That's right.
It's, just hearing all of the proverbs that mention the poor, I wonder whether the meaning of the people who are generous and blessed, because they give with the poor, like most of the other ones are elevating the status of the poor, reminding the reader that the poor are equal, they're both neighbours.
Yeah, you made them both.
Yeah, maybe it is just that notion of, associating with, because you'd have to associate with them if you're going to give to them, is not a negative thing. They're on the same level as you, and you could be blessed by them in the same way.
It's a very, very different view from, say, Hinduism.
Yes,
where you don't want to give to the poor, you don't want to support the poor because you're actually
keeping them there.
Yeah, you're trapping them in their karma. So you can see the foundations of modern Christendom, the economic sort of system of modern Christendom, where people are given equal opportunity, and it's important that everyone has access to justice, and there should be what's the term, philanthropic endeavors, etc. And it's just in one chapter of Proverbs you can see that. So okay, anyone want to add anything?
It's nearly 9:30.
Yep. 9:30, is it?
Yeah.
20, yeah.
My goodness.
Probably time to finish up, eh?
Yep.
Yeah.
So, we won't do this workshop, but I'll just explain that Ecclesiastes, Job, and Lamentations, actually Song of Songs, they both have very emotional, or all three of them have very emotional content. So Job is talking about the suffering of innocent people in the context of a just God. That's the problem that it wrestles with, and it's wrestling with it in an emotional context. This is not William Lane Craig. This is a song. This is like a novel. The modern, what we would do today to try to do this is write a fictional story rather than a textbook, and perhaps that's what Job is. Perhaps it's a parable, a fable. But the point of Job is to go on that journey with a man who's completely without fault, and who receives the worst suffering that you can receive without dying, and how he grapples with that, even the betrayal of his friends. And Ecclesiastes is similar, but it's really about the meaninglessness, the vaporous nature of life, where everything that we do just vanishes away. All the work that we do has no reward, no appropriate consequence, and Ecclesiastes just really digs into that and ruminates on that, and uses a lot of beautiful poetry, some of which has been appropriated by modern music. So There Is a Time, and works beautifully in that context. But it's a really complex structure to it. So it's quite confusing to read, and you have to remember that you're reading something that has a perspective that is the perspective of the person having the experience. So you need to keep that in mind. And the same applies to... Thanks, Lana. The same applies to Song of Songs. Song of Songs actually is from the perspective of several groups, and our translations helpfully tell us what the perspective is that you're reading. So the women, the wife, the beloved, and the lover, and it presents this relationship from all of those perspectives, and talks about how each person in that relationship feels about it, what it makes them feel, and it doesn't hold back. It just goes. This one is perhaps the most vivid in its imagery. It really just goes all
That's why
out.
it's good the young didn't come tonight.
Yeah. So they're beautiful works, but they make no sense if you try to read them like you're reading Genesis or something like that. They make absolutely no sense. You've got to remember that they're so subjective that you're invited to go on that journey with that person. It's like reading a modern novel, which tends to be. Modern novels have the trend, and you can see it in young adult novels. The trend is to move closer and closer to the perspective of the character. So in young adult novels, they're actually in first person present tense to get you as close as possible to the experience. You're actually reliving the experience with the person as they're experiencing it, and they're doing that to try to get you into their shoes as much as possible. That's because they're not very good authors, but anyway.
No, they want you to enjoy
Job,
it.
I think
Escape.
I think it's cheating, but Job and Ecclesiastes and Song of Songs don't have to cheat to achieve that, because they're just such beautiful literature. And so you need to ask yourself the questions when you're reading it. How does this structure of the book actually address this feeling, this journey, this perspective? Where does the current passage that I'm reading fit into that? And what feeling are the images intended to convey? Not what information are they intended to convey, but what feeling, what perspective, what emotion, what nuance and memory, and whose perspective is being expressed, because it's so subjective. You've got to be aware of who it is that's saying that. It's not God. That's what's common with all of these. That it's very human. It's from a human perspective, not from God's perspective. So you need to be very much aware of that. And that's it. So if you want to do a workshop on that, just read some of that and ask those questions. And these are some resources that I'm really enjoying this. This is my book that I'm doing for devotions. It's basically there's 3 volumes in this, and each psalm has basically a sermon. So it's an expository expression of each psalm, and Boise really digs into the psalm, unpacks its imagery, and talks about its cultural context and the historical background behind it, and helps you understand the language, the original language, and provides modern sort of equivalents, and really helps you enjoy and understand the psalm. It's really, and also to apply it, because it's sermons, it's got application. It's really, really well worth reading, that book. And this one's a much drier technical book that helps you helps you do the hermeneutics. So that's from Mark Furtado, who's actually a pretty good author.
Or is it potato?
Could be. You say Furtado. You say potato. I say potato. So just remember that biblical poetry is figurative, subjective, emotional, and imaginative. That it's often factual, but it's always true. It's fairly easily recognizable, even in translation, and it's very easy to tell when it's poetry in the original language, and that it's omnipresent in the Bible. It's everywhere, and it's used for teaching, worship, and reflection, and that's how we can use it today.
Thank you, Malcolm.
Sorry, it went over.